All right, so I've got Stephanie here and baby Price. Stephanie's been wrangled into helping me fold the binding. I want to show you how to fold a longer piece of fabric so we can do one continuous fold when we go to cut our binding. It's going to make your project more consistent, more accurate, prettier, and faster, easier too. So Stephanie's going to grab an end. I've got almost 3 yards of fabric here, and we're going to grab, I've ironed this fabric so that if you've washed it, you've ironed it. If you've washed it, you've ironed it and starched it as well. Otherwise, you can just take it right off the bolt. We've got about 44, 45 inches of fabric, and again, about 3 yards. We're doing straight of grain fold. We're going to walk away from each other. Stephanie's fingers and my fingers are going to be on the top here, not on the sides, and we're going to hold nice and snug. And what we want to look for, this is our salvage edge here, this is our folded edge here. We want to make sure there aren't any folds, any creases, any gaps in here. And we're going to pull pretty snugly at this point, and we're going to now come to the middle. Stephanie's going to take the ends. She's going to line up her 2 sides to make sure they're even, and she's coming from, again, the top rather than from the ends. My fingers are inside, and what we want to look for, as soon as she gets everything lined up, then I'm going to look to make sure there's not a gap and there's not a gap here. This should all be nice and flush. If you've got a gap, when we go to cut this, you're going to have inconsistency. We call them those dog ears. We don't want dog ears. We're going to greet each other again in the middle. She's going to take those edges. We're going to line those up. At this point, the fabric that I have is a little bit wider than I have with my ruler, but that's okay. I'm going to take these ends. We're going to go to the cutting table and we're going to fold this one more time, not in halves, but in thirds, and you'll see how we cut this. Thank you. All right, at this point, we've gone from having the 2 of us fold this fabric to my cutting table. I'm going to be using our no slip strip ruler, one of our rotary cutters. I'm using the left-handed cutter, and this is the 45. We'll talk about the 45 and the 60, when I would use one versus the other. And I'll show you the right-handed cutter and how to hold it correctly. At this point, what I want to do, though, is use my mat. Our mats that are true and accurate, these measurements that are on the mat, when I use these lines, I don't have to worry about our mats being inaccurate. These are true and accurate, unlike most of the other mats that are out there. But when I look at my ruler and I look at my fabric from here to here, right about here to right about here is where my cutting surface is. So I need to do one more fold. Instead of folding it in half, I'm going to fold it in thirds. You can fold it in half, but when you have a bigger piece of fabric, again, I have a little bit under 3 yards. It's closer to like 2 and 3 or 2 5/8. If I had more fabric and I folded that in half, that would be too much for me to go through. All right, at this point, what I want to do is look at my edges here and make sure that these are all lined up fairly consistently. And I'm going to feel my fabric. I'm going to feel every inch of that fabric to make sure that I don't have any creases and puckers. Got a little bit of a pucker here. I'm going to feel inside and make sure that it's just laying down flat. There, we're good. All right, at this point, I'm going to use my lines on my mat. I'm looking at any of the lines anywhere along here. What I want to do is not have it too far down. If I have it too far down, then that rotary cutter can't fit into that ruler, and you'll see that in a minute. I'm going to line up my edges here, and I'm going to move over to the side and look at this and at this to make sure they're lined up on one of my markers. And if they're not close to an edge, what I want to do is see that they're straight. So for instance, I don't have any line that's here. I'm just a hair above, but I want to see the consistency. And then I'm going to look down here as well, and I can see that I'm going to even this out just a little bit, and I'm going to even this out a little bit. We're taking the time at this point to do all of this because I'm cheating. I don't want to cut a short binding strip and have to join those bindings. If you know how you take a piece of fabric, and do that join, I don't want to do that. I want to cut my bindings so that I can cut and have my binding strips ready to go, so when I work on a project, I'm good to go. Now I want to look at my distance. When I look at where my cutter would start, right about here and right about here, I've got plenty of room for this to be able to allow me to cut. Now let's talk about the ruler and talk about me being left-handed versus you being right-handed. I'm left-handed, so I'm looking at the left side and I'm looking at the left end. If you're right-handed, you would be over here and you'd be looking at the right-handed side of the ruler and up here, away from you rather than in front of you. When I look here, I can see I've got 2 1/2, 1 5/8, 2 1/2, 3 inches. When I turn my ruler the other way, if I wanted to do 2 1/4, there's my 2 1/4 for bindings. You've also got 1 1/4, 1 inches. If you're going to be doing jelly roll strips, you're 2 1/2. I'm going to do a 3-inch binding. 3 inch is what I like you to do when you're learning to use the tools. So what I want to do is line this up. I'm looking at my marking here on my mat. I'm looking at here, and I can see I've got this lined up perfectly consistent. Now, we're going to take our rotary cutter. I'm left-handed. Right-handed, left-handed, doesn't matter. If you're used to our rotary cutter, then you know what I'm talking about. If you've used our rotary cutter and you haven't had the success that we talk about at the shows, then I want to talk about some of the important features of this. We'll spend more time on this later. But one of the problems that other people have done with other rulers is they put their body weight on here. And when we do that, I don't know if you can tell, but that blade isn't straight and consistent. When I move my body position, I'm going to line up my ruler again. When I move my body position so that my hip and my shoulder, or where my rotary cutter is, when I go to cut, I'm going to push forward. That blade is nice and straight. If I have it at an angle, what I get at the top of my fabric isn't going to be the same as what I get on the bottom of my fabric. I'm going to square off my project first. It doesn't take your body weight to hold this down. What you need is just a little bit of pressure, because there's blue on the back of our ruler here and blue on the back of our ruler here. When I go to cut, I'm going to be able to get all of those layers of fabric that I have, and it's going to be consistent. So I'm going to roll forward. I've squared off my project. I want to take my rotary cutter and place this in. Now, rather than going straight down, I want you to tilt, and when you tilt, it kind of fits into that slot. A little bit of pressure here. I don't want your hand back here because your ruler is going to be further up, and if you think what I'm doing is cutting through. I've cut through one strip. That strip, I've got one long piece of binding, almost 3 yards, a little bit more than 2.5. At this point, I can lay this down. I'm looking at the edge of my ruler. I'm lining this up. What I'm looking for is to see that this is lined up evenly all the way along. And I'm also looking at where my blade will fit is between here and between here. If I've got this further down this way or further up this way, I'm going to be missing all of those folds. And the whole point of this is to make this consistent and easy. Accurate, consistent, fast, and easy. All right, at this point, using our no-slip strip ruler, I've gone ahead and cut a couple different widths. I've got 2.5, I've got 3 inches, I've got 4 inches. So I can use basically a bunch of different measurements here with my ruler. Our no-slip strip ruler is a straight edge, so if I just wanted to cut a straight edge, because of that blue, you can see it's going to grab. Unlike those acrylic rulers that slide, yeah, they're see-through, but they let me see as I cut. Whoops, I need more fabric. So we use it as a straight edge, but we use it also for our different widths. If you're cutting bindings, if you're doing charity projects, you're doing jelly rolls, you're doing log cabins, you're doing a bunch of something, this ruler is wonderful. But every time if I were doing jelly rolls and I did 2.5, I'd have to cut, move it over, cut, move it over, cut. I'm cutting once I've squared up my project, and I cut, and I'd have to move this over. If you're going to be doing a lot of projects, then I highly recommend this ruler. Now this ruler, I think kind of as a splurge, but we're having a lot of people that love this ruler because it makes everything, again, accurate, consistent, fast, easy. This ruler, I've got increments of 1/2 inch. So I've got 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch. I will tell you, when you're cutting and you're tired, this gets really blurry. So what I do at home when I'm using this ruler is I'll take a chalk pencil and I'll mark wherever it is that I want to cut, and then I wipe that off afterwards. So what I would do with this ruler, because I can't see my fabric, is again, I'm going to use my mat. When I look at this ruler, the first thing we need to do, though, just like with our no-slip strip ruler, is get this ready to go. I buy this ruler out of the package. It comes out like this. The black is cut. I don't know if you can see right in there. This is cut by our laser machine. But when I turn this over, you can see on this side, it's a solid blue material. That means it's never been used, and when I go to cut, it's going to hug my blade, not letting me cut inconsistently. If you own any of those other rulers out there, there's a gap there, and it causes the blade not to go straight, but it lets you angle it, and you can even cut into those other rulers by accident. Ask me how I know. So when you get this at home, you can see I've cut these slots here. So I want to show you how to cut those slots. I'm going to get my fabric out of the way. I'm going to see where I stopped cutting. Right in here is my last cut, and I'm going to be cutting here. Now you can tilt this to the side and you'll feel it grab. You can hear that click. And when I go to cut, I'm just cutting right here, and I kind of tilt it forward. And I like to cut forward and backwards. You probably don't need to cut twice, but I'll place that in. I'm going all the way, and I come all the way back and kind of tilting. You'll continue on through all of this. If you know you're only going to use every 2 inches, every 1.5 inches, whatever it is you want to do, then you can cut only those if you want to. It's totally up to you. One of the things that happens with this sometimes, if you're going to be cutting a lot, is on your blade you'll get glue. And if you do get glue, this is the old version 1 rotary cutter. If you get glue on there, then take that blade out and clean it out before you use this. I used my old cutter because now I can go to my left-handed cutter that I use all the time, and it's not damaged my blade. It's not going to damage the blade. I shouldn't say damage. It's just that glue is sticky on there and you're going to take that off. All right, so I would have cut all of this, and I've done that at home on mine. This is here at the shop. So let's get our fabric in position and let's cut some of this. Again, I'm going to line this up. I'm looking at my markings here. I'm looking at from the side here, and I'm going to place this in so that when I place my ruler on, I'm going to be using the markings on my mat, and I again want to think about how my rotary cutter is going to be able to cut. If I bring this down here, I don't know if you're able to tell, those ends of the cuts are past, or my fabric is past the ends of the cut, so that's not going to do me any good. So if you center your fabric on your mat, you're going to be pretty okay. I'm going to use this line right here, my 13, to have this. That's my squared up edge. If I hadn't squared up, I'm going to bring this past my 13 and I can square that up. I'll use that 13. We're going to pretend this hasn't been squared up. I'm going to use this. I'm looking at the distance too here to make sure that's the same width as here. I'd come over here, make sure those were, again, consistent with the straight mark here and the same thing here. Now we're going to take our ruler and I'm going to look at this line right here and line that up with my 13. So I'm going to bring this here. Because the ruler is bendable, flexible, just like the other ruler is. Don't wear flowers, don't wear shirts that catch. Because it's bendable, flexible, when I bring this down, I can make sure my fabric hasn't moved. So I'm going to bring this down. And I'm looking here, I'm looking here. What I'm going to do is look over here and see that the space that's here and the space that's here are even. I'm going to bring this back a little bit. What I'm doing is I'm just lifting my ruler a little bit and repositioning. Now I'm looking at that edge, I'm good, and I can peek under there if I want to for my fabric. Let me get my rotary cutter and we'll cut a strip. We're going to square this off. I'm going to place that right inside and I square that off. And whatever it is I want to do, half, half, half. I've got an inch, I've got an inch, I've got here's 2.5. So when I place this inside and I go to cut, I'm cutting my half, 2.5. And there's my 2.5 inch strip, and you can see there's where I've cut that off. All right, so we've cut binding strips. What have I done? At this point, I've cut almost 3 yards, a little bit closer to 2 3/4, 2 5/8 yards of fabric. Why do I want to do that? Well, again, accuracy, consistency, quicker, easier. When you're working on a wall hanging, on a table runner, on a quilt, on a little girl's dress, on an apron, anything where you would end up with a shorter piece of binding fabric and having to join the binding fabrics, what I'd rather you do is start on your projects just like I've done up here. Instead of, as on this project, see how that's too close to the corner? I was taught don't join here because of the symmetry. I was taught to cut back and join here. Well, if I really were working on this project, instead of it being a sample, I'd end up having to join here, and join here. This method of using our ruler, our mats, our rotary cutters lets me start here, finish here, join here. I don't have to join anywhere else. So even on some of your bigger projects, not king size quilts, not your queen size quilts, but on some of your other projects that you're really going to be doing, you can with your binding strips have 2.5, 3 inches of fabric or 3 yards of fabric. And if we use a 60mm cutter, you're going to be able to see we can cut through a whole lot more fabric. I think I have probably 12 layers of fabric here. I've cut through at home 15 layers of fabric. It really depends on the type of fabric that you have, but the quality of your fabric. It's going to allow you to cut through about 12, 15 layers of fabric at a time. I like you to start here, finish here, join here. If you don't have to join anywhere else on your project where you've started, what have we done? We've improved the quality, we've given accuracy, consistency, we're not seeing the joins everywhere, and it's faster and easier.